There are movies that thrill, movies that inspire, and then there are a rare few that seem to leave a faint imprint on the mind, an impression that lingers long after the final image disappears. These aren't secret government experiments or suppressed psychological tests. They are ordinary, publicly released sci-fi films, shown in mainstream theaters and streamed across countless homes. Yet, scattered among their audiences are reports that go far beyond standard emotional reactions, dreams repeating the same symbols night after night, an unexpected surge of déjà vu lasting long enough to feel unnatural, or sudden fluctuations in emotion that seem to arise from nowhere. None of these reactions have ever been acknowledged by filmmakers or studios. No official statements, no psychological studies. Instead, the accounts appear quietly tucked inside obscure forum posts, whispered in online conversations, or mentioned almost apologetically in early reviews. People claim to have sensed low-frequency vibrations during specific scenes, tones that seem to bypass the ears entirely and settle in the body. Others describe visual rhythms, patterns of color, flickers of light, or oddly timed edits that felt as though they were speaking to something beneath conscious recognition. What makes these accounts more intriguing is their consistency. Viewers from different cultures and languages, watching in different eras, described nearly identical sensations. And in several cases, later releases of these films were subtly altered. Slight changes in color grading, softened audio layers, or brief cuts removed without commentary. No official explanation accompanied these revisions, leaving many to wonder whether the original versions contained something unintentionally potent. Tonight, we reopen these strange reports. We're looking at 15 sci-fi films that, according to those who experienced them, seem to shift their state of mind in ways difficult to explain, impossible to verify, yet too recurring to ignore. If even a fraction of these testimonies reflect genuine cognition shifts, then perhaps cinema can influence perception in ways far more mysterious than we imagine. 1. Arrival, 2016. While Arrival is frequently praised for its emotional resonance, many viewers quietly reported sensations that seem strangely aligned with the film's exploration of nonlinear time. Some described an unusual form of déjà vu afterward, moments that felt as though they were looping gently, like echoes brushing against reality. Even simple tasks, such as brewing coffee or stepping into a room, carried an inexplicable familiarity, as if they were experiencing fragments of memory from a timeline slightly out of sync. Others noted shifts in their sensory awareness. Soft sounds became more prominent, while louder noises seemed dulled, creating a surreal inversion of perception. This subtle rearrangement of sensory priority mirrored the film's introspective tone, leaving viewers feeling momentarily suspended between clarity and disorientation. Sleep brought its own peculiarities, dreams unfolding in circular patterns, scenes repeating with slight variations yet maintaining emotional coherence, a nighttime reflection of the film's non-linear structure. The film's score is often referenced as a potential catalyst. Its layered tones, resonant pulses, and organic vocal textures seem engineered to evoke deep emotional processing. Combined with the film's slow, contemplative pacing, this may temporarily shift the brain into a heightened introspective state, causing certain cognitive echoes to linger. Some fans who examined different releases noticed soft adjustments in sound mixing and color grading. Early theatrical versions reportedly contained stronger bass textures and more dramatic contrasts, while later releases smoothed these elements. Though never officially addressed, such changes fueled speculation that the original mixes had unintended sensory intensities. To those who felt its imprint, Arrival did something unexpected. It gently altered the rhythm of subjective time. It left behind a quiet reverberation, an elusive sensation that past, present, and future might not be as separate as we assume, dissolving only gradually as the mind returns to its usual linear path. 2. Stalker, 1979. Among all of Tarkovsky's films, Stalker stands out as the one most frequently associated with peculiar psychological aftereffects. Viewers often describe emerging from the film with an inexplicable sense of emotional heaviness, as though the world outside the theater had become muted or slowed. Some reported a strange auditory phenomenon, faint noises, such as dripping water or distant metallic groans, echoing in quiet rooms long after the movie ended. These weren't hallucinations, but subtle impressions that felt tied to the zone's haunting atmosphere. Others described a shift in emotional perception. Ordinary tasks felt strangely detached, as though they were moving through their lives with a fragile sense of purpose. A few reported feeling observed not by another person, but by something intangible, like a lingering presence. This echoed the film's portrayal of unseen forces shaping the zone, and the sensation sometimes persisted for hours before gradually fading. The film's meditative pacing is often cited as a possible cause. Long, unbroken takes gently push the viewer into a reflective state bordering on trance. When the movie ends abruptly, the mind may struggle to re-establish normal emotional rhythm. The alternating use of sepia tones and natural color further amplifies this effect, subtly disrupting the brain's ability to maintain consistent visual continuity. Film collectors who compared earlier 35mm prints with later restorations noticed small but meaningful differences: softer ambient noise, slightly altered hues, and minuscule timing shifts in certain transitions. These changes, though never acknowledged officially, suggest that the earliest versions may have been more psychologically demanding. For many who felt its impact, Stalker functions almost like a contemplative ritual. It slows the tempo of thought, thickens emotional atmosphere, and leaves behind a faint impression that the invisible forces shaping the film's world might, for a brief time, be shaping theirs as well. 3. The Double, 2013. Although The Double is a relatively small-scale film, its psychological effect on certain viewers has been surprisingly profound. Some described a peculiar self-awareness setting in right after the movie ended, an acute sensitivity to their own movements, tone of voice, or facial expressions, as if observing themselves from a detached vantage point. This sensation wasn't panic-inducing, but unsettling enough to make people pause and reconsider even the most mundane gestures. A number of viewers also noted a distortion in how familiar rooms or hallways appeared, saying the proportions felt slightly off or that the lighting seemed colder or harsher than usual. What stands out most are the reflections. Several individuals reported that mirrors and glass surfaces felt strangely distant or wrong, as though their reflections didn't respond with the immediacy they expected. These micro moments passed quickly, yet the emotional residue remained an uneasy tension between identity and perception that mirrored the film's themes. Some described feeling briefly disconnected from their routine actions, as though they were performing rather than inhabiting their own behavior. Analysts often point to the film's dense audio-visual texture as the likely cause. Its industrial drones, mechanical rhythms, and heavy shadows create a claustrophobic environment that subtly infiltrates the viewer's subconscious. The tight compositions and skewed angles contribute to a sense of spatial instability, forcing the brain to overprocess visual cues. This may explain why some people experienced temporary perceptual discrepancies afterward. Enthusiasts who compared international and domestic releases noted small but significant differences. Some cuts featured darker shadows, harsher audio textures, and slightly choppier transitions elements that may have intensified cognitive strain. Later releases softened these qualities, though the changes were never formally acknowledged. For those affected, The Double does not frighten or shock in the traditional sense. Instead, it nudges the viewer toward a fractured sense of self, a fleeting suspicion that one's identity is something delicate, flexible, and easily doubted. And though the sensation dissipates quickly, it leaves behind the brief impression that the mind can split its perspective more readily than we'd like to believe. 4. The Fountain, 2006. The Fountain left countless viewers grappling with a strange fusion of emotional weight and cosmic wonder long after the film ended. Many described emerging from the experience with an unexpected stillness, an internal quiet that seemed to slow their perception of time. Mundane tasks felt strangely delicate, as though their senses had been tuned to a different frequency. Others reported a sudden sensitivity to circular shapes, flickering lights, or repetitive patterns, each triggering a cascade of feelings they couldn't easily explain. Dream accounts were widespread. People wrote about drifting through golden nebulae or floating above vast voids washed in shimmering light. These dreams carried a profound emotional resonance, often leaving viewers contemplative for days. Some even described waking with the sensation of having moved through multiple lifetimes in a single night, an eerie parallel to the film's interwoven timelines. Critics suggest that the hypnotic repetition of the score, along with the film's rhythmic visual cycles, may nudge the viewer's mind into a meditative state, The macro photography techniques used for the cosmic imagery create patterns that feel organic, almost cellular, provoking a deep emotional response that bypasses traditional narrative processing. The combination of these elements may explain why viewers temporarily experience altered states of reflection or heightened symbolic awareness. Comparisons of early cuts reveal that certain transitions were longer and more fluid, enhancing the film's dreamlike flow. Later releases shortened these transitions, potentially lessening the immersive pull. Color grading also shifted subtly across versions, sparking discussions about how the original hues may have contributed to the film's lingering psychological aftereffects. For many, the fountain functions less as a story and more as an emotional resonance, an echo felt in the mind and the body. It leaves behind a sense of drifting between worlds, caught briefly in a contemplative current that slowly dissolves as reality returns. 5. Beyond the Black Rainbow, 2010. Few films envelop the viewer as completely as Beyond the Black Rainbow, a hypnotic visual experiment that seems designed to unsettle perception. Many viewers described entering a fog-like mental state after watching the world feeling muted, thoughts slowing, and time appearing to stretch into elongated moments. Some noted that bright neon tones in real environments felt oversaturated, while darker spaces seemed to subtly pulse or contract, as if mimicking the film's oppressive aesthetic. A number of people reported sensations of drifting during specific sequences. The film's long, steady camera movements and its droning synth score produced feelings of detachment, as though consciousness were trailing behind the body. These experiences were brief but memorable, distinct enough that viewers frequently discussed them online as part of the film's lingering effect. The sound design is often cited as the cause. Early screenings reportedly included harsher, heavier synth tones, creating a low-frequency vibration that some viewers felt in their chest or throat. Later home media versions softened these frequencies, though no formal explanation was ever provided. Fans who compared the versions speculated that the original mix unintentionally produced physiological reactions. Dream reports were equally notable. Many described dreaming of endless geometric corridors, glowing red chambers, or faceless figures moving with unnatural slowness. These dreams often used the film's unmistakable color palette, suggesting that its sensory design may imprint itself onto short-term memory. Ultimately, Beyond the Black Rainbow is remembered not just for its narrative ambiguity, but for the atmospheric pressure it exerts. The film doesn't frighten, it engulfs, and for a short time afterward, everything around the viewer seems to carry a faint echo of that synthetic, dreamlike world. 6. Donnie Darko, 2001. Over the years, Donnie Darko has developed a reputation for provoking unusual psychological responses that mirror its exploration of warped timelines and unstable perception. Many viewers described leaving the film with a subtle but persistent feeling that reality had shifted slightly. Some said that walking through familiar spaces felt strangely predetermined, as if their movements were being traced along an invisible blueprint. Others recounted experiencing prolonged episodes of déjà vu moments, stretching longer than normal, tinged with an eerie sense of inevitability, as though they were replaying events rather than living them. Dreams were another recurring theme. People reported vividly dreaming of shimmering time tunnels or seeing Frank's rabbit mask flicker within their peripheral awareness, disturbing their sleep even if they weren't frightened. These dream fragments often resurfaced during the day in the form of mental flashes, fleeting images of distorted skies, or looping paths that resembled the film's metaphysical sequences. The film's audio design frequently comes up in discussions. During key moments, the low, vibrating tones and pulsing hums create an atmosphere that several viewers described as physically immersive. Some who watched early DVD versions noted that these tones were sharper and more resonant than those in later releases, suggesting that the original mix may have carried a more visceral impact. Emotionally, viewers often experienced a peculiar blend of melancholy and introspection. Routine actions felt slightly surreal, as though they were observing their own life from one step removed. This temporary emotional drift, aligned with the film's themes of fate and fragmentation, contributed to the lingering sense that the viewer had stepped briefly into a parallel psychological space. While these reactions don't persist long, Donnie Darko leaves behind more than its narrative. It imparts a brief but unmistakable sense of standing between timelines, an awareness of threads pulling in multiple directions, even after the screen fades. 7. Perfect Blue, 1997. Though widely known for its exploration of fractured identity, Perfect Blue has also accumulated a surprising number of reports from viewers describing psychological echoes that persist after the film ends. Many described moments where their thoughts felt strangely separated from their emotions, an internal disconnect that lasted for minutes or hours. Some reported brief lapses in memory, such as believing they had already performed a routine action or having difficulty recalling whether a recent event truly happened. These weren't severe reactions, but they were striking enough to be shared across online forums, where viewers compared experiences and found uncanny similarities. Others mentioned heightened sensitivity to reflections. Mirrors seemed slightly different, either too sharp or too distant, giving a subtle sense that something wasn't aligning perfectly. A few reported experiencing emotional flashes, sudden bursts of feeling that didn't match their immediate context. These reactions echoed the film's constant blurring between reality, imagination, and performance. Analysts often point to the film's disorienting editing style, rapid shifts between fantasy and reality, overlapping imagery, and abrupt scene transitions as a key factor. These narrative dislocations force viewers to constantly reassess what they're seeing, which may temporarily influence how the brain organizes memory and perception afterward. Sound design also plays a significant role. Early DVD releases contained sharper, high-frequency stingers during tense scenes, which some viewers described as physically jarring. Later remasters softened these peaks without explanation. Over the years, Perfect Blue developed a reputation not just as an intense psychological thriller, but as a film that subtly unsettles the viewer's sense of self. It leaves a faint tremor in the mind, a momentary questioning of memory, identity, and perception that lingers just long enough to notice before it dissolves. 8. Solaris 1972. Tarkovsky's Solaris has long been described as hypnotic, but numerous viewers have shared experiences suggesting the film's influence can briefly reshape how the mind processes memory and emotion. Many reported stepping back into daily life with a strange heaviness, as if time had slowed, or as though their internal world had grown quieter. Some described a sudden rush of introspection, noticing old memories surfacing with unexpected clarity. Others felt a dull ache of longing that seemed to come from nowhere, mirroring the film's exploration of unresolved grief. Dream accounts were similarly striking. Viewers frequently reported dreaming of rooms that blended with visions of Solaris's sentient ocean spaces shifting in fluid ways or objects shimmering as though they carried hidden intent. These dreams were described as unusually vivid, often accompanied by soft ripples of light or slow motion that lingered into waking consciousness. The film's uniquely meditative pacing may induce a mildly altered mental state, prompting the brain to continue its contemplative mode long after the credits. Scholars have long speculated that Tarkovsky's long takes, muted soundscapes, and strange emotional stillness place viewers in a quasi-trance state. This creates a perceptual lag when the film ends. Switching between sepia and full color heightens this effect, subtly confusing the viewer's sense of continuity. Over the years, fans comparing various releases have identified minor changes, shifted color temperatures, softened ambient noise, and subtle adjustments to the lengths of certain shots. None of these revisions were officially documented. The result is a film that seems to echo inside the viewer far beyond its runtime. Solaris doesn't frighten or shock, it quietly unsettles. It temporarily alters the way some people dream, remember, and confront their own emotional landscapes, leaving behind a sense of introspective drift that fades only slowly. 9. 2001: A Space Odyssey 1968. For decades, viewers of 2001: A Space Odyssey have described experiences that feel more like aftershocks than simple reactions to a film. Many said that when they stood up to leave the theater, the world around them seemed subtly askew, distances felt stretched or compressed, and ordinary spaces carried a faint sense of unfamiliarity. These sensations weren't dramatic, but they appeared often enough to form a pattern. A surprising number of people also mentioned that, later that night, they dreamt of swirling shapes, endless tunnels, or kaleidoscopic bursts of color that mirrored the film's Stargate sequence. Even those who typically never remember dreams said the imagery clung to them with unusual clarity. Some viewers reported a kind of perceptual after-ringing, claiming they heard faint tonal vibrations hours after the film ended. These weren't actual sounds, but internal impressions, subtle, wavering notes that surfaced in moments of silence. Others described a lingering emotional detachment, as though their thoughts were floating a half step behind their senses. Certain audiences who saw early prints in the late 1960 seconds and 70 seconds insisted that the Stargate sequence felt more aggressive than today's restorations, sparking theories that early versions were visually harsher or more disorienting. The film's hypnotic structure may explain part of this. Kubrick's long, meditative shots, combined with the dissonant score and abstract imagery, push the viewer's perception into a highly receptive, vulnerable state. When the film abruptly transitions from cosmic abstraction back to stillness, the brain needs time to restore its normal rhythm. Restoration experts have noted minor changes between older and newer versions, shifts in contrast, softened transitions, recalibrated color bursts, none of which were officially addressed by the studio. While there is no verified psychological explanation, 2001 remains one of the few films consistently associated with altered sensory impressions. For many, its true effect takes place not during the film itself, but in the quiet moments afterward, when reality feels momentarily out of tune. 10. Primer, 2004. Primer has a reputation for collapsing the mental framework of anyone who attempts to follow its labyrinth of timelines, but some viewers reported effects that extended beyond intellectual confusion. Several people described a kind of cognitive drag after their first viewing, a sensation that their thoughts were running slightly behind real time, as if they were processing information through a dense filter. Others noted moments where they struggled to recall the order of basic tasks, mixing up steps in conversations or second-guessing actions they had just performed. Some viewers experienced fleeting distortions in spatial awareness. Rooms felt narrower, ceilings lower, or corners seemed to shift subtly when glanced at quickly. A handful wrote about phantom repetitions, performing a movement or gesture and suddenly feeling as though they had done it twice, like a mental stutter. Unlike typical déjà vu, these sensations were mechanical rather than emotional, aligning strangely with the film's cold, analytical tone. Many theorized that the movie's relentless delivery, rapid dialogue, abrupt edits, and dense technical jargon forces the brain into a high cognitive state that lingers even after the film ends. The mind continues calculating, decoding, and reorganizing long after the credits, leading to the momentary breakdown of ordinary processing. Viewers who compared early theatrical screenings to later home releases noticed small changes: softened background hums, reduced metallic resonance, and slightly cleaner dialogue tracks. These adjustments sparked speculation that the original audio mix may have been unintentionally taxing, adding to the foggy mental after effects reported by early audiences. Over time, Primer acquired a subtle legend, not merely a puzzle film, but a story that momentarily recalibrates the viewer's cognitive rhythm. For those affected, the world felt briefly misaligned, just enough to notice, just long enough to be unsettling. 11. Blade Runner 2049, 2017. While Blade Runner 2049 is celebrated for its atmosphere and emotional weight, a portion of its audience described experiences that seemed to reach beyond the film's narrative power. Some viewers woke the next morning with oddly detailed memories of moments that never existed, echoes of conversations, childhood sensations, or dreamlike fragments that felt eerily authentic. These weren't grand hallucinations, but subtle impressions that blurred the line between personal history and imagined recollection. Others reported a shift in sensory perception immediately after the film. Colors in their environment appeared slightly drained, as if the outside world were still trapped in the movie's palette of dusty oranges and deep blues. Time also felt slower to some movements, sounds, and thoughts seemed to stretch, as though their inner tempo had synchronized with the film's meditative pacing. Several viewers described an almost physical pressure in their chest during sequences with intense low-frequency bass, a sensation that persisted faintly even after leaving the theater. The film's sound design became a focal point of discussion. Early IMAX screenings featured bass tones so powerful that audience members reported feeling vibrations through their rib cages rather than their ears. Later, digital releases were noticeably softer, though the studio never addressed the revisions. Fans who compared versions noted other small changes: shifts in lighting warmth, subtle differences in shadows, and micro-adjustments in some transitions. Some psychologists suggested that the film's themes, artificial memory, fractured identity, and emotional suggestion, may prime the viewer's mind into a state where perception becomes unusually sensitive. In this heightened state, even minor sensory impressions can feel profound. Ultimately, Blade Runner 2049 became known not only for its exploration of synthetic memory, but for the strange echoes it left behind, brief, fragile reminders that our sense of self and time may be far more pliable than we assume. 12. Enemy 2013. Enemy has long carried a strange power over the people who watch it, though not because of its plot alone. Many viewers reported experiencing vivid, intrusive dreams in the nights, following their first viewing, dreams dominated by towering spiders, dim hallways, or doppelgangers appearing in places they shouldn't be. These dreams often shared the same sickly yellow palette that permeates the film, leading some to wonder if the movie's visual language had imprinted itself onto their subconscious. The odd part is that these reports came from viewers who had no contact with one another, yet described nearly identical imagery. Others mentioned unsettling flickers of derealization. Walking through their homes or workplaces, they felt for brief moments as if the world's depth had flattened, or as if they were seeing their surroundings through a tinted filter. Some described a strange pressure of being mirrored, the sense that someone, somewhere, was imitating their movements. A few even said that reflections in glass or polished surfaces seemed to lag by a fraction of a second, though logic insisted this was impossible. Theories emerged quickly. Fans speculated that Villeneuve's use of claustrophobic framing, amber saturation, and shadow-heavy compositions might temporarily disrupt the brain's spatial processing. The soundtrack, the unsettling blend of buzzing drones and distorted strings, also drew attention. Certain tones seemed to vibrate in ways that felt more physical than auditory, and these sensations lingered even after the movie ended. Comparisons between early festival cuts and later home releases revealed subtle differences: softened shadows, slightly dimmer highlights, and a gentler sound mix. No official announcement explained the changes, but many believed the original presentation was unintentionally overwhelming, amplifying the psychological effects viewers reported. Whether coincidence or something deeper, Enemy built a reputation as a film that lingers beneath the surface. It leaves behind a faint pulse of unease, a whisper of duplicate selves, and a sense that something unseen is moving just a step behind you. 13. Under the Skin 2013. From the beginning, Under the Skin elicited reactions that felt strangely intimate, less like fear and more like a quiet, intrusive presence settling into the viewer's mind. Many described feeling emotionally flattened for several hours afterward, as though their ability to connect or empathize had been temporarily dialed down. Others reported the opposite, a sudden wave of sensitivity that left them contemplative or unsettled without understanding why. These emotional shifts mirrored the film's alien perspective, creating the eerie sense that the viewer had momentarily adopted a consciousness not entirely their own. Visual distortions were another recurring theme. People wrote about noticing darkened outlines around objects or feeling as if certain hallways or streets seemed longer than usual. A few mentioned an unusual awareness of silence, an auditory emptiness that felt unnatural in familiar spaces. Dreams were also frequently reported, floating in vast black voids, encountering faceless figures, or moving through rooms drained of color. Much of this may stem from the film's relentless audiovisual design. The score's scraping strings and irregular pulses seem built to bypass rational processing. Long tracking shots isolate the viewer inside Scarlett Johansson's inhuman vantage point, creating a dissociation that doesn't immediately dissolve after the film ends. Fans comparing releases notice subtle alterations in later versions: softened base layers in the void sequences, smoother grain patterns, and slightly adjusted pacing. These tweaks fueled speculation that early cuts may have been more psychologically abrasive. Whatever the case, Under the Skin gained a reputation as a film that lingers not through imagery alone, but through a faint shift in perception. For a short while, it feels as though the viewer has borrowed an alien mind and must slowly find their way back to their own. 14. Coherence 2013. Coherence is a film built from improvisation and fractured logic, and a surprising number of viewers reported sensations that seemed to echo its central premise. After watching it, many described a fleeting but unmistakable feeling that their surroundings were slightly off, as though everyday objects had shifted a few centimeters without their noticing. Others recounted moments where they paused mid-action, suddenly unsure if what they were doing was new or something they had already done seconds before. These weren't dramatic episodes, but small stutters in perception that aligned uncannily with the film's narrative of overlapping realities. Memory disruptions were among the most common reports. Some viewers claimed brief uncertainty about whether certain conversations had taken place earlier that day or in a different context entirely. Others mentioned an odd sensation of parallel decision paths, an awareness of choices they didn't make but somehow felt. A handful described subtle dissociation, the sense that they were observing their own actions rather than simply performing them. The film's structure likely plays a role. Rapid cuts, overlapping dialogue, and scenes without clear emotional anchors force the viewer to continually reorient themselves. That cognitive strain, sustained for the full runtime, may cause lingering disorientation. Interestingly, those who compared the earliest festival cut with later home releases noted differences: warmer lighting, less aggressive shadows, and slightly altered pacing. Some believed the raw original cut's chaotic rhythm contributed to the subtle mental disturbances reported by early audiences. For many, coherence left a strange aftertaste, a brief window in which the world felt like it might be one decision away from shifting. The effect faded quickly, but for a moment, viewers felt as though they were standing between multiple versions of their own life, aware of paths that flickered just out of reach. Pitneist, Annihilation, va tizoch, osemneist. When Annihilation reached audiences for the first time, most viewers focused on its surreal landscapes and the unsettling logic within the shimmer. But beneath mainstream reactions, a quieter stream of unusual experiences surfaced accounts from people who felt something linger long after the film ended. Some described momentary flashes of bending light in their peripheral vision, as though their eyes were still adjusting to the shimmer's refracted world. Others said natural colors, sky, leaves, shadows looked slightly warped or strangely illuminated for hours after watching, giving everyday environments an alien sheen. More curiously, many reported a strange kind of inner splitting, a sense that their thoughts were being mirrored or that their consciousness had two layers briefly aware of each other. For some, it was accompanied by dreams far more vivid than usual, dreams of abandoned shorelines, glowing forests, or the lighthouse appearing from angles never shown in the actual film. These patterns emerged on forums and comment sections from viewers in different countries, none of whom had interacted with each other. The film's audiovisual design often becomes the subject of speculation. The pulsating tones during the final confrontation were described as resonating not through the ears, but through the stomach and ribcage, creating a physical sensation that lingered afterward. Those comparing theatrical and digital releases noticed that later versions softened these frequencies, reduced some of the intense flares, and subtly smoothed certain changes never announced by the studio. Viewers theorized that the film's looping visual motifs, shimmering distortions, and organic symmetry may have briefly disrupted their perceptual filters, nudging the brain into a state of heightened sensitivity. Nothing harmful, nothing lasting, just an uncanny residue. Over time, Annihilation developed a reputation as the film that leaves behind a faint shimmer of its own, not on the screen, but within the viewer's perception. Bonus: Jacob's Ladder, 1990. While Jacob's Ladder isn't typically filed beside mainstream sci-fi titles, its unsettling focus on fractured perception has caused many viewers to report lingering psychological disturbances similar to those associated with experimental speculative cinema. Over the years, a surprising number of people have described waking abruptly during the night with the overwhelming certainty that someone had been standing nearby, an impression so vivid that some turned on the lights only to find emptiness. Others recounted hearing faint whispers of their own name as they drifted between dreaming and waking, as though caught in an unseen threshold the film itself seems to inhabit. A portion of viewers also reported a temporary thinning of reality in the hours after watching. Streets appeared unusually silent, rooms felt hollow, and casual conversations carried a strange emotional distance. Some even questioned whether certain memories they recalled were genuine or influenced by the film's surreal imagery. These experiences dissolved quickly, but left behind a lingering sense that the boundaries of perception were not quite as solid as they had assumed. Much of this may stem from the film's abrupt transitions between grounded realism and disorienting hallucination. Rapid cuts, stark contrasts in lighting, and tightly framed shots generate a rhythm that unsettles the viewer's ability to maintain a stable sense of continuity. Early home releases were reported to contain louder, sharper audio spikes, particularly during scenes depicting disorientation or panic, while later remasters reduced these extremes. Collectors who compared editions noted that the original soundscape felt more abrasive, perhaps contributing to the psychological tension described by longtime viewers. For many who experienced these reactions, Jacob's Ladder functioned less as a narrative and more as an intrusion, a story that didn't merely depict confusion and vulnerability, but briefly instilled those sensations within the viewer. Even after the film ends, its shadow lingers on the edge of awareness, as if reality still flickers between states for just a moment longer than expected. Some films simply end, but others seem to echo, quietly shaping thought, emotion, or perception long after the final scene has passed. The titles explored tonight belong to that stranger category, stories whose influence slips beneath awareness, leaving behind subtle ripples that viewers struggle to name but never forget. If these accounts reflect even a trace of truth, then perhaps cinema doesn't just reflect reality, it gently alters the way we move through it. If you're ready to keep exploring the hidden currents, unexplained reactions, and obscure anomalies buried inside sci-fi history, stay with us. Vaulted Futures will continue opening the doors most people never notice exist.